Hello and welcome to another Super Deluxe Games Cast review. Two of us here today. I'm John, and I have my producer slash bestie, Derek.
For a
Hi,
moment, I was
buddy.
worried you forgot my name. There was a little bit of a pause there.
No, I'm just tired. I'm just
I
tired.
get
It's
it.
been a
I
long
get
day.
it.
It's been a long year, and it's
It's
been a long
somehow
year
getting longer as we get to the
since the
end.
beginning. Since last Tuesday, it's been a very long year.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Derek, we're not here to worry about any of that extraneous crap right now. We are here to talk about Dragon Quest III HD-2D.
We're not just here to talk about video games. We're here to talk about like one of the video games of all time.
Thank you to Square Enix for providing the code. I've been playing it on Switch for about a week now. I'm about 35
So
hours
presumably
in.
the worst looking and performing version.
Yes.
Although it looks gorgeous. Like again, I saw you play it in person, and
yeah, we'll get into all that.
Yeah.
So I want to thank Square Enix for the code and for the opportunity. Full disclosure, I have not finished it, but I am 35 hours in, and I'm past.
You're pretty close.
I'm past Baramos, Derek. If that means anything to you.
Yes, it does.
So,
I know Dragon Quest 3.
Yeah.
And you do as well, right? Like that's the nice thing about this being a pretty faithful HD-2D remake is like, if you are familiar with the original game, much like dealing with the pixel remasters, you know what you're getting into, although not exactly, and I'm sure we'll get into that.
We will.
Because I have questions.
So I have played the Game Boy Color version of Dragon Quest III, classic game, one of the greats. And I got to tell you, 35 hours in, we'll talk about visuals and all that stuff in a bit. Just right off the bat, it hews very closely to the original concept behind Dragon Quest III. The game starts off asking you some questions. There's a disembodied voice asking you questions about yourself, what you would do in certain scenarios. And I found myself restarting like 4 times because I didn't want to be like a spoiled brat or a coward.
It's so funny.
And so I was like, man, I don't want this to be my personality. It doesn't have any real effect on gameplay or story. But just knowing that the game considers me, like, for example, a spoiled brat, I'm like, no, man.
Correct.
I can't play the game like that. So eventually I was a daredevil or something, and I was like, okay, cool, that's fine. You know what? Accurate. So we're gonna go from there. Aside from, so there are additions to this game. Like, throughout the game, there are actually new boss encounters that have been added that were not present in the original NES.
Well, let's talk about what Dragon Quest III is. Right?
Well,
you kind of
let's do
bypass the whole like first paragraph of what Dragon Quest III is to jump straight into.
It's been a long day, Derek.
I know.
Tired. So Dragon Quest III is
the Ur RPG. It's the one.
So it is
it's the game.
It's the third game from a release standpoint. It is the first game in what is called the Erdrick trilogy chronologically. Chronologically, it goes Dragon Quest 3, Dragon Quest 1, Dragon Quest 2.
Yeah. 3 being a prequel was like a big twist at the time, but like that's one of the like Darth Vader's Luke's father, right? It's one of those things. Rosebud is the sled. It's known at this point.
Everybody knows, which is why they released Dragon Quest 3 first, and the 1 and 2 HD-2D remakes coming next year.
Yeah.
You start off as a hero. You name the hero, you choose the appearance.
Very very Dragon Quest. You know what you're getting into if you know Dragon Quest by reputation, that it's a very purist, traditional, menu-driven JRPG.
Very much so.
That leans very heavy into a lot of like very arch fantasy like tropes and characters, largely because Dragon Quest helped codify a lot of that back in the day.
Well,
right?
And Dragon Quest III, I think more than any other game during the NES period, aside from the original Final Fantasy, has had more of a lasting impact on RPGs going forward than any. It is one of the formative RPGs.
Yeah.
I would say, alongside the original Final Fantasy, that kind of just cemented the genre for the next several decades.
Like I said,
kinda
I keep calling it like one of the video games of all time. So
it absolutely is, and so you, regardless of the appearance you choose, you are the child of Ortega, a hero who disappeared mysteriously when you were but a child, and now at 16 you have been chosen as the new hero of the kingdom of Aliahan. And in Dragon Quest fashion, you set forth, you sally forth, and you're doing all your Dragon Quest things. Um, Dragon Quest 3. So before I fired this up, Derek, like as much love and praise as we heap on Dragon Quest 3, like me specifically the Game Boy Color version, um, it still has these like it's still very much a mid 80s, late 80s,
it's an NES
early
RPG,
90s
right?
RPG, which
like,
means
let's
the
call it what
storytelling
it
is it's very basic.
That's something that a lot of people figured out going back to, like, again, I brought up the Pixel remasters, but the Final Fantasy
Right.
Pixel remasters, a lot of people went back to 1, 2, and 3 and went, oh, these are rough. And it's like, yeah, they were NES games, and you can only polish them up so much.
The story here, Derek, is mostly the same from a narrative standpoint.
Right.
Like there are. Do not go into this if you play Dragon Quest 3, the original. Do not go into this expecting.
This is not Final
massive,
Fantasy 6.
No, this is not, and it's not Final Fantasy 4. It is, do not, like, it's a nice narrative. It's a fun narrative. They did not overhaul it at much at all. There are a few, like, obviously it's presented with more dialogue and more of a flair, because this is a
voice
modern
acting,
take.
and
There is limited voice acting. It's not fully voice acted, like something like Live Alive, but there is voice acting for major scenes, peppered throughout the game. There is an expanded narrative in the sense that there's more dialogue, but it's taking you to the same place. There are no surprises here.
There are literally more text boxes of dialogue, because they have rewritten this game, but it's a rewrite from a perspective of what words were on the page, not a rewrite in terms of, this isn't trying to pull that like meta remake kind of thing. This is a remake.
Right.
They're going to hit the same points beat for beat. They're just going to be a bit more eloquent with what they do with those moments. So
there are, and like I had somebody ask me, have they added stuff in the vein that they did with like Live Alive? And the answer is no. Like there are extra.
Well, unless they snuck some little shit at the post ending.
So I already know how it ends.
Oh, okay. So you've okay. Well, I was gonna say you've been talking to a bunch of other people who have also been playing to review,
other reviewer friends,
and you know that they haven't changed anything. Okay,
they have not, which is fine. They don't. That's how it.
Honestly, again, considering we're leading straight into remakes of 1 and 2 anyway, like don't worry about it, right?
Yeah. So that being said, the biggest addition is the addition of a new class, and the monster arena, and both of these things are tied together. The new class is the monster wrangler.
I thought the monster arena was new because I saw you engaging with that a bit, and I was like, I didn't think any of these mechanics were in 3. I thought none of it was around till 5.
The monster arena is new, as is the monster wrangler, which is basically like sort of like a blue mage, Derek. They use monster skills. They don't learn. They learn them naturally, mostly by leveling. So you're not like copying, enemy abilities, but they are abilities that enemies use.
Yeah.
And this class is damn near broken. It's a lot of fun to play with. And it's tied to the monster arena in the sense that the more monsters that you are able to wrangle up, the more your monster wrangler understands the nature of those beasts, and his attacks get stronger. The monster arena is a fun little diversion. It's not necessary to the core gameplay loop. Like, you don't have to do it if you don't want to. These monsters are essentially there to just give you a little something extra to do. And if you are able to make your way through the various, ranked fights, you get, a ton of, gold, and, you get items and stuff. These monsters are just peppered throughout the world, and the monster wrangler actually learns a very useful ability called, I can't remember what it's called offhand, but basically it'll tell you if there's a monster to wrangle nearby, so you don't have to, so you're not like, oh my god, I'm just gonna wander all over the map and hope I run into one. You don't have to fight them. They're just like, oh hi, I'm friendly monster, and they run off to Monty, I think his name is. And he's kind of like your
so it's
monster
treated more like a side quest than the full blown like Dragon Quest
100%.
V and many other games
100%.
onward where you can just straight up Pokemon style catch monsters.
That's not what this is.
Okay.
Correct. And they don't follow you into battle. There's an attack that the Monster Wrangler uses that says, hey, he summons all his monster buddies, and
but it's basically just a spell.
It's just an attack. That's all it is. It's a spell. That being said, I think it's fun. It's again in essential. You don't need to do it, but you can get a ton of extra money. Which, if you know anything about Dragon Quest games, equipment in this game is extremely expensive.
Yeah.
And
that's one thing about we talked about the remake, like adding dialogue boxes and adding more like literal more dialogue and more text.
Yes.
To help smooth out the narrative, but it sure didn't seem like they did much to change the general feeling of this being a game that you've got to occasionally grind through. Like really hung up on a boss, the boss troll.
Boy, did you.
Who you had to do some grinding and some real change up of tactics to get through that wall.
It was
lucky. You like spiked a fucking drink.
Yeah, I did. Like so that's another thing that has not changed. This game is hard. This game is hard as balls.
It's an NES RPG.
But here's the thing. I eventually got through it. There was another super difficult boss I spent an hour and a half on last night. I eventually got through it. It's not Dark Souls hard. It's not impossible. It's just throwing a challenge at you. And I enjoy it. Like
there's points where let me put it this way. The difficulty curve, if people are not used to like much older RPGs, the difficulty curve is not this nice smooth you can expect to always be ready for that next boss. You are going to hit points where you get the key item that leads you to a boss fight, and you are capable of taking out all the enemies around you, and you're going to get to that boss, and then the boss is going to wipe the floor with you, and you're going to have to grind out a few levels,
So well, and so yeah, it is a very difficult game, but not unfairly so. I will also say that I'm trying to figure out the best way to put this. It is not going to, if you don't like Dragon Quest and if you don't like grindy RPGs, it's not going to change your mind.
This is not going to change. Like, this is red meat for like people who love old RPGs.
This is not trying to win new Dragon Quest fans.
Yeah,
this is for Dragon Quest fans.
If you're well, I think you could be into old RPGs and maybe have never played a Dragon Quest.
I'll put it a different way. This is for fans of old hard JRPGs. It's not. This is not a casual. This is not like it is a difficult game. And your mileage on that may vary. So just to throw that out there. That being said, there are some new staples of the Dragon Quest series. Mini medals are there.
That's good to hear.
Mini medals are back. The music is fully orchestrated, so none of that MIDI stuff.
It sounds so much better than I am used to hearing out of this franchise. I mean, it's still NES era compositions, which means that they're very short and they loop very frequently.
Yes.
But gosh, do they sound pretty by comparison.
So speaking of pretty, I want to get into the visuals just a second, but one thing I kind of mentioned earlier, but I just want to really emphasize it real quick. There are some new boss fights sprinkled throughout the game that were not present in the original versions.
Are they basically just like famous bosses from other games that are bonus fights?
Mostly. I mean, there's buildup. Like these bosses are fully voiced, so when you're fighting a major enemy.
Are they optional?
No, these are story bosses.
Oh, so they've added. They've literally added story bosses.
They've added story bosses.
Never mind. I misunderstood. I thought this was like Dawn of Souls style. Like we added some legacy bosses.
No, granted, they're like it's basically like Master Gargoyle shows up and he's like, "I'll kill you all," and like it's not. They're not adding layers upon layers of.
Yeah, there's not new subplots. They've just put a few more boss fights in,
which is cool. the one thing I will say, Derek, that I was a little disappointed here was that there is no actual new boss theme. It's just the battle theme.
I mean, that's Dragon Quest 3, right? They didn't
it's Dragon
have
Quest
one.
3. It's not the end of the world, and it's a very minor nitpick, but it is a nitpick. But Derek, this game looks real good.
It does look really good. I really like it. We were all
good.
talking about it because I happen to really like the aesthetic of the HD-2D like games.
Too.
I like, as Justin pointed out, Dragon Quest completely does away with that like tilt shift effect that's very common in a lot of the HD-2D games, especially Octopath. Where you get that real narrowed depth of field that makes everything look like it's like toyetic and miniatures.
Yeah.
And Dragon Quest just does away with that entirely. And I remember like our buddy Scott White walked away from his time with the game feeling like, I'm not sure how I feel about this visually. Like, it looks less impressive to me because there's literal like less post-processing going on with the image. I still think it looks really good from what I saw. I think the sprite animation of like the enemies and the spell effects is so good. I think it's rather a joy to look at.
Yeah, like so and like, full disclosure, I am playing this on Switch, right? So yes, it is the worst looking and worst performing of the bunch. That being said, it looks great and it runs fine.
All it's going to do on other systems is be a tiny bit sharper,
That's all. I think, like, I don't have like anything connected to my television. I mostly play it docked. I think it's docked. I think it's 1080p on my TV. I know that it's 30 frames a second. Every now and then, when you enter a town where there's a lot going on, you will catch a little stutter, a little frame rate hitch here and there. It's nothing egregious on the level of like a Link's Awakening or something like that.
Well, that's kind of
little stutters here and there, but it's nothing to get too upset about. This is one of those games where like it's a turn-based RPG. I don't need it to be at 60 frames a second. I just need it to look good and run well.
This is Unreal Engine, right? Like all the HD-2D games have been Unreal Engine, right? If I remember correctly, and like Stutter's just an Unreal Engine problem that they cannot overcome with 4 or 5. So like, really glad we hitched the entire industry on that fucking thing, but that's another topic for another time. But yeah, I mean, I was watching and like the game looks great,
Yeah, I agree 100%. It is an absolutely gorgeous game. Like Derek said, like it is uniformly, it's going to be a little clearer on, PC or like,
it's not like it looked like it had Vaseline rubbed over it on the Switch.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
I feel like. Oh, sorry. You go
This
ahead.
is one of those games that I was just gonna say. This is one of those games that feels right at home on the Switch. You can, it feels at home on a handheld system. And it's a great game to curl up on the couch with or curl up in bed with. So yeah, like it from a visual standpoint, I have no problems. Like you, Derek, I love the HD-2D kind of aesthetic, and it looks really freaking good.
Well, and here's what I would say, right? Dragon Quest, I've had a bit of a soft spot for Dragon Quest for a long time, right? I played a lot of Dragon Quest Monsters growing up. I loved Dragon Quest 8 on the PS2. I since had like gone back and played a lot of the older Dragon Quest games. And I think for people who are interested in gaming history, for people who are interested in like the growth of RPGs, like I feel like this is a must play, right? Because Dragon Quest 3 is one of the most important video games of all time. And it's being made. There's been the mobile version, but like this is by far the best version of this game,
100%
out there. And it's an important piece of history to experience that's been cleaned up and made more palatable to modern tastes. I still think people need to go in with the context that like this is a pretty faithful remake of an NES game, but
it is
like within that context, this is the granddaddy of them all. This is the game that shut down a nation's economy for a day, right?
It did. It absolutely did.
No other
That's
video
what
game
happened.
has done what Dragon Quest III did, which is shut down a fucking workforce. Like
maybe this will kind of like explain it to people. Dragon Quest III, along with Final Fantasy, are two RPGs what Resident Evil 4 was to over the shoulder.
Man,
action games.
I gotta be real with you. I know we're big Final Fantasy respecters on this podcast. I don't think Final Fantasy 1 deserves to be mentioned alongside Dragon Quest 3. I don't.
I don't know.
I think Final Fantasy itself owes everything to Dragon Quest, right? Without Dragon Quest, there's no Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy is the knockoff Dragon Quest, the one that got good.
Without sun, there's no moon, Derek.
Well,
without light, there's no dark.
And look, I like Final Fantasy more than Dragon Quest, right?
I'm just messing with you, man.
but like, I also, if like maybe people don't understand that context, right? That like Final Fantasy 1 owes everything to Dragon Quest. Without Dragon Quest, there's no Final Fantasy. And
I would agree with that.
In that regard, like there is no pedestal high enough that you can place Dragon Quest as a franchise. And these first 3 games in particular, for what they paved the way for. If you were an RPG fan, everything you love comes from Dragon Quest.
Yeah.
You know,
I agree.
To the extent that, like, sure, before that you could trace it back to like wizardry and Dungeons and Dragons and things like that. But like Dragon Quest is one of those big pivotal moments that completely redefined everything. So yeah. I mean, like it's people should play it. And I'll be really curious to see what happens with 1 and 2. It does seem like 1 and 2, my read on the situation is they're not going to be quite as heavily retouched. I don't imagine they're going to add additional bosses or like really add a bunch of extra dialogue or maybe even.
Well, I mean, you've got
acting.
2 games. I mean, you've got 2 games. I'm assuming will ship as 1. So
yeah, but also like 3 was already much longer than 1 and 2, right?
Yes.
Dragon Quest 1 is very short.
It's like a 10-hour game
if
at
that.
best. Like
it's very short if you know what you're doing. So like it's curious, but like I think these games are brilliant and people should play them and people should love them within the context of what they've done for this industry and this art form.
I'll tell you this much. Dragon Quest 3 HD-2D is going to be in my Game of the Year discussion.
Yeah, of course it was. I mean, that was set in stone.
I mean, it could have been a disaster.
The moment that was announced for this year, that was already in year. There's no way.
I mean, hey, look, I've been let down before.
We know you love an old crunchy RPG.
I do. But that being said, I have been let down before. And I was not let down here.
Yeah.
It's Dragon Quest 3. I could not recommend it more.
I think if people are sensitive to maybe like playing older games or games with bigger difficulty spikes, right? Or don't fall for the HD-2D art style, I think Dragon Quest 11 is a better starting point. For people looking to jump into the franchise. Matter of fact, I think in general, Dragon Quest 11 is your jump into the franchise point.
I would agree with that. And also just be aware, I really can't stress enough, if at its heart, this is still an NES game, as beautiful as it looks and sounds, it's an NES game. And so if that is not your particular cup of tea, then don't sip it.
That's a great phrase.
What's that?
That's a great phrase. I just like that. If that's really not your cup of tea, don't sip it.
I'm really good with phrases, Derek.
Sometimes you are, man. I'm gonna give you Derek, that. Sometimes you are.
Derek, I do good with paragraph and word and with regard to sentence structure.
Even letter?
Letter, too. I do great with letter. People come at me with tears in their eyes and they say, "Sir, you're so good with letter."
All right. Pack it up, big guy. So, buddies, final verdict, Dragon Quest 3.
Love it. A+.
Yeah.
2 thumbs up. 2 thumbs up. Go pick it up.
If it weren't for the fact that you and Britt just like sentenced me to the FF14 mines for the rest of my life, I'd probably be picking it up.
You can make time for this.
Oh, God. All right.
John,
Derek, take us away. Take us away.
Thank you, my good friend Derek, for doing the review with me. Thank you again to Square Enix for the code and the opportunity. Absolutely love this, and I am looking forward to Dragon Quest 1 and 2 HD-2D Remake next year. Thanks for listening, everyone. You can find us every Thursday night at twitch.tv/official SDGC at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we talk about all the cool gaming news that has happened that particular week. And don't forget to visit us on Blue Sky. We're on Blue Sky. We're on the skies. So at official SDGC. All that crap that comes after their names on Blue. Just look for official SDGC on Blue Sky.
We're hard to miss.
And and you will also find a link to our Discord, which I highly recommend joining if you're a cool, inclusive, progressive gamer like us. That's the kind of stuff we value there. So without any further ado, thank you very much. And remember, kindness costs nothing. See you later.